Hey everyone, it's Stephanie again, and you are tuned into the second installment of Ask Stephanie. Before we get started, don't forget to click the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can be the first to find out when I post these videos. All right, before we get into Ask Stephanie, I want to give a special shout out to our sponsors of this video, BetterHelp. If you don't know, BetterHelp is everywhere. It is an amazing online therapy platform with over 20,000 licensed professionals worldwide. It's incredibly convenient. I get a lot of questions about if I'm taking clients on or it being really hard to find a therapist nowadays because there's such a demand, and there really is, due to what's been happening in this world, multiplying, not being able to see people in person. There's such a demand. So I think BetterHelp is a great option. You are matched with a licensed professional within 48 hours after a short assessment. They assess your needs and you're matched, and you can begin talking very shortly. One of the best things that I always say about BetterHelp is the fact that if you find that you don't have a connection with your therapist for whatever reason, there is no fee to change therapists, which is huge because your relationship with your therapist is incredibly important. So there's no fee to switch therapists. They offer financial aid. You're able to log on securely if you forgot something or you want to message your therapist 24 hours a day. And most importantly, you're able to schedule the type of session that you are most comfortable with. So if you want to do video, that's an option. Also, you can schedule a phone session if you're more comfortable speaking on the phone. The feasibility is amazing, and I definitely think it's worth a shot. And if you use my link, which will be in the description box, you will be able to get 10% off of your first month. So just go to betterhelp.com/Stephanie Lee. That's better HELP, and get started today. All right, so now let's move on to Ask Stephanie. This week's question comes from Tanisha. Hi, Tanisha. She says, how do you have a successful conversation with a fiance without listening to respond? So I think that's a great question. I always say, and if you guys have watched my reviews, you have seen my husband chime in every now and then, and we talk about some of the things that we do. We always say, have rules of engagement. So a lot of people think, okay, well, I'll just do these things, or let's say that we'll do these things, but don't necessarily put in parameters to measure if they are crossing that boundary. When things are heated, if you're in a conversation, yes, there are chances where, you can cross a boundary, cross a line. But for the most part, if you don't draw the lines, you don't know where they're crossed. So I think the first conversation would be to really talk about what the goal is for your relationship and what the goals are. If the goals are to really practice effective communication, to practice active listening, to really figure out what those things are, to discuss what your triggers are, and move forward in your relationship in a healthy way. If you both are having that same mindset, then setting the rules and sticking to them should be fairly easy. Not all the time, but overall, because you will both be committed to these lines and these boundaries that you set. So in terms of having a conversation with someone who doesn't interrupt or who isn't listening to respond, one of the things that I would suggest is responding back to each other what the other person said. Because a lot of times when one person is saying another thing, guess what we're doing? We're listening to respond. We're like, oh, okay. Like, we're making mental notes of what does that look like? What am I going to say? Or here's this other thing that you did that was worse than what you're saying now. And that's what I'm saying. So one of the ways to interrupt that is to say, can you please tell me what you heard? Tell me what you think I just said. A lot of times we get it wrong. A lot of times we get it wrong until we get into this practice of active listening and saying, okay, this is what you said, or this is what I interpreted you saying. And then you can say, no, this is not what I said. And that person has to actively listen. The reality is it's important to have a partner who wants to do better. It's hard when you're wanting to do better and the other person isn't, or they have a different experience of relationships and communication, what they saw, what they experienced. So really, if you both are wanting the same thing, you're off to a great start. But that's where I would start. The conversation would be, what do we want out of this relationship? What does our communication look like? Ideally, what do we really expect from each other. What have we experienced? What do we see? Before that, if you set rules up but you don't really know where your partner's coming from, a lot of times they don't work out. But it is completely possible. So I would say one of the first things to do is really ask that person to explain, and you as well, explain what it is that they heard that other person say, so that we can dismiss the confusion, because a lot of times it's not what I said and now we're talking about a bunch of other things. That's one. Two, I would say that you need to have at least 2 to 3 rules that you really stick by, no matter how hard. Even if that means let's table this conversation until we're in a space that we can really have it. If that means yelling, once this person gets to yelling, well, nobody's listening anyway. So like, we really don't need to have that conversation. So maybe that can be a rule. If that means interrupting stops the conversation, then say, if you interrupt me, sometimes on autopilot it happens because we've been doing it, but starting out, you may have a little grace. But if it's a constant interruption, if you interrupt me more than twice without apologizing and stopping, okay, well then we just can't have this conversation. So I would have that. Also maybe cursing, whatever the thing is for you. Start with 2 to 3 rules that you guys want to implement within communication, so that you can be actively listening to each other, and then be able to have an actual conversation where you can express yourself, this person is actively listening, they can understand what you're saying, and vice versa. And then you guys can have a fruitful dialogue and work with each other. A lot of times when we get upset or we have issues in a relationship, we work against each other. You did this, I did that, you're not doing this, XYZ. But if we look at the problem together, like get on the same team and look at the problem together versus looking at each other and attacking the problem and each other, then there's just way more fruitful finish that can happen in that relationship. So I hope that helped. Thank you so much for sending in your question. All right, guys, continue sending your questions. I'm going to put the link in the description box to the email, but it is info@IamSuccessfullyMe.com for your questions. And I'll see you guys next week. Everyone, thank you and have a great day.